Hey, how's it going, guys? It's Nate here, and welcome to part 3 of our Fallout Mysteries Iceberg. Timecodes are in the description, let's jump right in. Starting off, one of the first characters we encounter during the events of Fallout 4's main questline is a man named Sturges. We initially meet him held up in the Museum of Freedom with Preston Garvey's small band of misfits, and he quickly assumes a respected role within the Minutemen, becoming the group's top engineer and handyman. No matter which faction the sole survivor ultimately ends up joining, or what decisions you make, Sturges is one of the very few NPCs in the game who will always remain essential no matter what. The character will always live and cannot be slain by the player, or anything else for that matter. However, if console commands are used to disable Sturges' essential status and forcefully unalive him, or if we just inspect his inventory via the game files, we'll find that Sturges actually carries a synth component. He's a synth. Now, this is an especially big surprise, seeing as the game never gives us any reason to suspect this out of the character. His synthetic truth is never mentioned, suggested, or commented on by the game, and it leaves us with some obvious questions. Was Sturges secretly an Institute plant all along, designed to spy on the Minutemen and manipulate them to their own ends? Or was he an escaped synth who was rescued, perhaps by the Railroad, and given a new identity years ago? Seeing as the character will dutifully help destroy the Institute with the Minutemen if the player goes that route, and even participate in the storming of their headquarters, it seems like the latter of those two possibilities is much more likely. But even still, when did he escape the Institute? How long has this guy been amidst Preston's ranks, and who else, if anyone, is aware? Alas, only Todd Howard knows, and Todd Howard won't tell. Next on our list. This one's a little goofy, but certainly third video worthy. What's a cat person doing in the wasteland? So, in Fallout Shelter Online, a Chinese exclusive multiplayer version of the Fallout Shelter mobile game, there's a small chance that a feminine feline character will approach your vault and request to be admitted as a new dweller. The character's name is Sashi, and in her dialogue, she claims to come from another world, where she made a living investigating Nord ruins before she one day accidentally fell into a portal and arrived in the wasteland. She's a Khajit. Sashi is obviously a Khajit from the Elder Scrolls universe. This is the second such reference we've seen so far in our Iceberg to elements from Tamriel leaking into the wasteland. The first such case was, of course, the Nirn roots that we saw the Brotherhood of Steel cultivating back in episode 1. Funnily enough, Sashi isn't just any old random Khajit, but is actually a specific character from the Elder Scrolls Blades mobile game, and she serves as the local lore master of our starter town, and somewhat resembles her Fallout Shelter counterpart. Alas, much like the earlier Nirnroot reference, my suspicion is that Sashi's inclusion is primarily tongue-in-cheek. But then again, the Fallout universe does sometimes feel like Atom's Daedric plane of existence. Coming in at number 3, we have the Dunwich mystery. So, honestly, this topic probably should have been introduced earlier in the Iceberg, because it's just such a prolific concept in the Fallout franchise at this point, and it's growing in importance. I think the reason I left it out of the previous two videos is that we've just been talking so much about this subject on the channel lately, I didn't want to sound too repetitive, but let's be real, no Fallout Iceberg would be complete without its inclusion. And furthermore, some of the stuff we'll talk about later on in this video does tie back into it. So let's just dive in. The Dunwich mystery refers to the fact that in Fallout 3, there was this building called the Dunwich Building in the southeastern corner of the map. This structure once served as the corporate headquarters for a company known as Dunwich Borers LLC, which specialized in the production of advanced mining equipment, particularly rock tunneling drills, and operated several mines and quarries across the old world. When the player would enter the ghoul-infested Dunwich building, we'd find ourselves subject to a whole host of strange, paranormal experiences. Objects would fly across the screen, seemingly at random, and we'd witness these bizarre, supernatural hallucinations. Within the structure's basement, a mysterious obelisk would lay, ominously alluding to something rather grand and dark. Later on, Fallout 4 would feature another location, simply called Dunwich Borers, which itself was a large quarry supposedly once operated by the company, but now in the custody of some raiders. Like the Dunwich building, this place also had some supernatural themes. We'd hear a loud, mysterious thumping sound in the distance every few seconds, and get more hallucinations, even witnessing at one point what seems to have been a pre-war sacrifice of some kind. Quite chilling. At the bottom of the mine would have been this strange temple place, submerged by centuries of emergent groundwater, with a mysterious dagger called Krimva's Tooth, which we could take as a sort of reward for clearing the dungeon. Recent Fallout 76 updates and some lore books included within the Fallout tabletop RPG games have revealed that Dunwich Borers' CEO and founder, a man named Richard Dunwich, was obsessed with the occult and dark arts, leveraging his company and wealth to satisfy his cravings for eldritch power. But the exact nature of the forces Mr. Dunwich was in pursuit of, and whether or not he was successful in taming them, remain unknown. As this video goes on, we'll continue to reference the Dunwich mystery and dive a little bit deeper with additional, somewhat related topics. But for now that we've got the basics out of the way, let's move on. Next, Cafe of Broken Dreams refers to a random encounter that the player could stumble into while traveling the map of Fallout 2. In it, the player would suddenly stumble upon a strange, liminal diner in the wasteland, called the Cafe of Broken Dreams, with a number of, unexpected and somewhat impossible inhabitants. Inside, we could find several vault dwellers, but not normal vault dwellers in the expected sense, but rather they were literally the vault dweller protagonist from Fallout 1. Like, we would encounter a bunch of different versions of the previous game's protagonist, who we played as, all still wearing their Vault 13 jumpsuits. We'd also encounter younger versions of several Fallout 1 characters, including Tandy, Set, and even Fallout 1's version of Dogmeat, who we could actually recruit as a companion here if we put on our Vault suits. While we can't enter formal dialogue with any of the characters here, they do talk and make several fourth-wall-breaking references to Fallout 1, immediately recognizing you as the descendant of the previous game's hero. The Vault Dwellers also make hilarious complaints about their players and how they think they were being played by a stealth character or a strength character. It's a real treat. A look in the Fallout 2 game booklet contains the following description for this cafe. Quote, "The Cafe of Broken Dreams. This place is home to a host of near heroes, almost rans and might-have-beens, all of whom have seen their best days pass them by. One of them may be a friend of yours from times long past. Chatting over a steaming hot cup of joe is a great way to remember the good old days." This diner seems to transcend normal dimensions of reality and exposes us to a number of people who should have been heroes of past, but are now instead relegated to a liminal random encounter. How this happened, however, and the nature of the physical properties behind this encounter remain to be big mysteries. Speaking of supernatural breaks in our modern understanding of physics, for our next topic in the iceberg, let's talk about Pylon V13. Pylon V13 is a small section of the Appalachian monorail, located in the Cranberry Bog region of Appalachia, and it's one of the strangest places in the Fallout franchise. Upon our arrival, we'll find a hastily constructed array of wooden stairs and structures, leading up to a monorail car, where something odd was afoot. The skeletal remains of several men in lab coats line the train cars, and a series of test tubes and other scientific instruments and experiments are scattered about. The car sits behind a particular pylon, Pylon V13, that seems to have been rigged to some electrical and Tesla coil system that occasionally emits strange sparks. On one table in the monorail car lies a holotape, titled Professor Greebley's Press Release, and it reveals the stunning experiment that these scientists were performing here. It's a little long, maybe a full minute or minute and a half, but it's absolutely worth the listen.
People told me my theories weren't possible. They mocked me and called me a foolish old man. Well, I'm here to tell you that the possibility of time travel is not only real, but that it can be accomplished interdimensionally. I've revolutionized this radical concept, a new way of thinking about skipping across timelines. Instead of employing the traditional and often clumsy use of gravity for time travel, I've discovered a way to punch a hole in the fabric of our reality. By slipping through this fissure in time and space at a high rate of speed, it's my belief that instantaneous time travel will occur. In a few weeks, I will be attempting to slipstream through dimensions using a monorail system as my chariot. If you wish to attend this historic event, I will be at Pylon V13 of the Appalachian monorail system. Be there and witness history.
Indeed, the scientists here were experimenting with time travel. Now, it should be emphasized that this whole project almost certainly occurred and concluded after the bombs fell. There's no way the pre-war government would have tolerated a bunch of wacky guys in lab coats occupying a section of the monorail, and the post-apocalyptic structures around the pylons further indicate that these experiments took place after the war, likely in the early days of the Charleston emergency government shortly before the arrival of the Scorched Plague. But perhaps a little later. We can't say with any semblance of certainty whether or not their project was successful. The presence of so many skeletons and our own understanding of physics would indicate that it wasn't. But here's the thing. The monorail cars here contain 6 beds. 6 scientists were working here, but we only find 5 skeletons. 4 in the existing monorail cars, and 1 on the ground nearby who likely took a fall. So, where is the 6th? Who was the survivor? The running suspicion is that our missing man was Professor Greebley, that he somehow escaped the fate of his colleagues, or, who knows, maybe part of his wacky theories turned out to be not so wacky after all. Maybe the appropriate question to ask isn't where is this skeleton or Dr. Greebley, but when is the skeleton and Dr. Greebley? The area around Pylon V13 is littered with super mutants, gulpers, and Mothman fanatics, and it seems to have been for a long time. So this area was likely abandoned by the survivor, if at all, years ago. But strangely enough, there's an active generator still running on the rail car, which I first assumed to be a mistake by the developers. It just doesn't make sense. You know, if this generator is running, clearly someone has to be bringing fuel to it, and if that's true, why hasn't that someone cleaned up all the skeletons? It just doesn't make sense. But the more I examine this site, the more obvious it becomes that Bethesda put a huge amount of detail into this space. I don't think that they just forgot to turn the generator off. Something more may be afoot here. Additionally, it can't be ignored that this location's name, Pylon V13, is a direct invocation of an ancient, cancelled Fallout MMORPG that was being developed by Interplay and Black Isle Studios, internally known as Project V13. Now, Interplay's V13 was cancelled pretty early on in development, largely as a consequence of a licensing dispute with Bethesda, and we know very little of what the game's story would have looked like or what lore would have been introduced and emphasized, so it's difficult to discern how the Fallout 76 Pylon may relate. But it seems to have some obvious correlation. Whatever the case, whatever was happening at this railcar and wherever, or again, perhaps wherever, that missing scientists are, remain some of the most curious questions introduced by Fallout 76. Sixth, we have Metroman Statues. Okay, so this one kinda ties back to the Dunwich stuff we mentioned earlier, but also deserves its own space in a video like this. You see, throughout the totality of the Fallout franchise, really since Fallouts 1 and 2, but especially in Fallouts 3, 4, and 76, we can find the strange style of titanium and rusted bronze faces, busts, and statues all over urban environments. They're easy to miss at first. You walk around and you assume this is, just some weird utopian architecture, but I promise it's deeper than that. The game's files often refer to these pieces of brutalist architecture as Metroman and Valkyrie statues, and they appear to be connected to something occult and dark. We especially find a lot of them around Vault-Tec, Robco, and other major pre-war corporate properties, Mass Fusion for example, as well as a few military bases and research stations. In Fallout 4, at the bottom of the Dunwich Quarry, beneath where we watch the surface hallucination, we actually see one of these strange heads deep below the surface, implying that it had been buried under thousands of feet of soil and rock for a very long time. This style of architecture is ancient, perhaps older than our understanding of civilization. So what's it doing all over Boston, Old Washington, and the West Coast? Furthermore, as many of you may know, the popular card game Magic the Gathering recently got a Fallout-themed expansion that introduced several new Fallout-themed cards into the franchise. One of these cards is a sorcery card, simply called Blasphemous Act, which allows the wielder to do 13 damage to every opposing creature on the battlefield in exchange for 1 magic. Its tagline reads, quote, "Everyone knew the bombs were coming. Everyone but the public." And the image this card uses is one of a Valkyrie statue looming over the ruins of a destroyed city. An odd choice, to say the least. Now, there's so much more that connects these bizarre statues with the occult, and there's more specific examples of these statues in really weird places, and I promise we'll get to those in time, but for now, I just wanted to introduce this concept to you. It seems obvious that they have some sort of eldritch meaning, and were a popular fixture of pre-war architecture. For some mysterious reason. Our next topic, Guidestones, centers around an unmarked Fallout 76 location in the Savage Divide region of Appalachia, where we can find a series of strange, flat stones aligned next to and on top of each other with mysterious, alien-like engravings. They've been dubbed the Guidestones due to their similarity with a similar set of rocks found in Georgia, which those of us in the United States and region know as the Georgia Guidestones. But they don't seem to be related beyond these cursory similarities. The Georgia Guidestones contain words and language in English, whereas the Fallout 76 ones look more to be like a map of some kind. And the ones in Georgia were actually recently blown up and destroyed, but that's its own unrelated can of worms. I digress. As you might expect, the meaning and symbolism behind these rocks is the source of ferocious debate and speculation in the Fallout 76 community. While the Guidestones aren't connected to any major quests, we do find them referenced in the terminal entries of Dr. Michael Blake, an old linguist who worked at Vault-Tec University before the bombs fell. In his terminal, which can be found in what remains of his office at the campus, there is an entry titled Guidestones Translation. It reads, quote, "Jacqueline has instructed me that she would feel safer if I moved the translation key offline. The woman is paranoid, but I don't disagree that it's for good reason. It's because of this that she insists on keeping the original notes with her. She says it's for the best, just in case someone gets to one of us, so none of us have all the pieces. Even Agent Wilson's taking precautions. We could be on to something big here. Then again, I still maintain that the runes are simply ancient petroglyphs left by the indigenous peoples of the region. Jacqueline believes they may be extraterrestrial in nature, but I'll stick with Occam on this one. The hypothesis with the fewest assumptions is often the correct one." So this guy, this Michael Blake character, is a linguist who worked at Vault-Tec University and was doing work with another person named Jacqueline to try and translate the Guidestones. Mr. Blake is convinced that they're terrestrial and indigenous in nature, but he still seems to agree that they should be taking precautions. It seems like someone's trying to get to their research for some reason. Why would that be? Maybe someone doesn't want them getting to the bottom of this. Now, what we know, and what Michael Blake doesn't, is that aliens are very much a real phenomena in the Fallout universe, and are regular visitors of Earth. So there's significantly fewer assumptions necessary for Jacqueline's extraterrestrial theory to be true. Furthermore, in 2022, Fallout 76's seasonal Invaders from Beyond update dropped, which centered around a Zayton invasion of Appalachia, and we'll talk more about this later. Mind you, this was a seasonal update. It only lasted for about a month or so. But in it, while it was running, a new random encounter was introduced, where the player could encounter a black trenchcoat wearing, sunglass donning NPC, simply named the Emissary, who was highly suggested to be not of this world himself. Anyway, in one of the radiant lines of dialogue you can get out of him when approached, he would suggest that the Guidestones were not of human origin.
Have you seen the mysterious Guidestones? Quite majestic, are they not? Some might say otherworldly.
Towards the end of this iceberg, we'll talk a little bit more about the Zayton invasion of Appalachia and some of the other cool lore that introduced. But for now, it seems increasingly obvious that the mysterious Guidestones were indeed of alien design. But what they were trying to communicate is anyone's guess. Next on our list, this is among my all-time favorite gaming mysteries. And in my opinion, it's not given nearly as much attention as it deserves. That being the question of where did the people of Covenant come from, and more importantly, what was their relationship with Vault-Tec? You see, the town of Covenant is a thriving settlement west of Lexington, with a strangely pre-war and sanitized culture. Its people dress in pre-war clothes, live in pre-war houses, and are suspiciously polite and well-mannered. Of course, during the quest Human Error, where the player is recruited to help track down a wealthy caravan merchant's missing daughter, it's revealed that the people of Covenant are all a part of a secret anti-synth underground society led by the Dr. Rosalind Chambers, who lost her family as a child to a rogue synth attack and now seeks vengeance on all synth kind. We eventually discover the people of Covenant and Dr. Chambers have occupied an entire nearby sewer system, where they conduct horribly torturous experiments on captured synths, including that missing caravan daughter who we're supposed to track, and from there the player will have to choose between shutting this whole sinister operation down and freeing the poor robotic girl, or allowing Covenant to continue with its anti-synth crusade. It's an interesting little side quest, but the real reason I bring this strange society and narrative up is because the people of Covenant seem to have some kind of association, some affiliation with Vault-Tec. For starters, perhaps the most obvious clue that most players will notice is that upon our initial visit to the town, we'll be stopped at the shut gate by a man named Swanson. Swanson has greasy hair, wears a leather jacket, blue jeans, and speaks in a suave, Henry Winkler Fonz kinda accent. He kinda reminds you of a tunnel snake from Fallout 3. But it gets better. Swanson will halt the player and explain that while everyone's welcome in Covenant and he'd be happy to let us in, first we need to submit for a brief examination, which he calls the safe test. Once we agree, he'll lead us to his desk and proceed to administer this test orally, where he asks a series of what seem to be random questions in order to gauge our response. Stuff like, what would you do if you were a doctor and a patient walked in with a mutated foot? How would you handle a property dispute, etc. Now, there are no wrong answers, and no matter what we say, Swanson will always pass us and open the gates. But if you've played Fallout 3, you would know that this is the exact same GOAT test that's issued to teenagers in Vault 101. The Generalized Occupational Aptitude Test, or GOAT, was used to assign Vault dwellers to what was usually their lifelong profession, and somehow Covenant got a hold of it and is using it as their admissions test. The references to Vault-Tec in Swanson's examination are removed, but it's otherwise clearly the exact same thing. Furthermore, the town doctors and many of the researchers occupying the nearby sewers are all literally wearing Vault-Tec lab coats. And when we eventually storm that secret sewer complex, we find several Vault-Tec posters hung up to the walls. That's not even the best part. The combat armor worn by Covenant guards, when closely inspected, is clearly just faded Vault-Tec security armor with the Vault numbers scratched out. What on earth? What the heck do the people of Covenant have to do with Vault-Tec? Where are they getting this stuff? Well, indeed, that's the million-dollar question here that Bethesda clearly wants us to ask. A few of the posters we find in the sewers do indeed contain direct references to Vault 101 from Fallout 3. Like, you literally see some of the Vault-Tec cartoon boys wearing Vault 101 jumpsuits, which is a pretty big hint, and Swanson does give Tunnel Snake vibes, the big gang from Vault 101, so it's easy to look in that direction. Depending on the Lone Wanderer's choices in the capital wasteland, Vault 101 could have suffered any number of fates. It could have completely collapsed and lost its entire population. It could have remained sealed and preserved its status quo of splendid isolation under an authoritarian overseer. Or it could have opened up to peaceful trade and commerce with the wasteland. It's also possible that the player could have intentionally compromised the Vault's filtration systems and forced its people to leave. There are like 2 additional endings that I've forgotten and can't remember off the top of my head, but you get the idea. Long story short, almost anything could have happened to Vault 101 in Fallout 3, so this could be a canonization of one of those endings. Given that Fallout 4 only takes place 10 years after the events of 3, it's entirely possible that the people of Covenant were once Vault 101 dwellers, or somehow had some strong affiliation with them. However, this theory has some problems. For one, none of the citizens in Covenant share names or surnames with any of the old 101 inhabitants, And again, it's only been 10 years, so some of the same dwellers should be there, and they're not, nor are any of their obvious descendants. Furthermore, it's also possible that Bethesda was just reusing Vault 101 poster assets in the Covenant sewers without paying much mind to the number. It wouldn't be the first time asset reuse reared its ugly head in the franchise. An alternative theory that I really like but can't prove instead connects Covenant with Vault 111, our vault. You see, we know thanks to a series of abandoned terminal entries that when 111's door was first sealed, its overseer and head scientists promised the security guards and staff that they would be able to open up and begin recolonizing the wasteland within 6 months. Alas, Vault-Tec would never issue that all-clear signal that allowed them to leave. Eventually, 6 months became 9, became a whole year, and the security detail started getting restless. At some point, they just couldn't take it anymore. They mutinied. The guards killed the overseer, many of the head researchers, and just opened the door up themselves, heading into the primordial wasteland. Now, this event, this rebellion and subsequent breakout, occurred around 2 centuries prior to the events of Fallout 4, and we never learned the ultimate fate of what happened to those mutineers after they broke out. Perhaps they and their descendants could have been responsible for the inception of our oh-so-strange town. Or, hey, there are several vaults throughout the wasteland that are currently abandoned and whose original residents' fates are unknown. So, the possibilities with Covenant are endless. Perhaps a bit too endless. What was going on beneath the crater? So, the crater is a location on the far northeastern edges of Fallout 76's map. It's the site of a crashed space station once known as the Valiant One, and has since been transformed into the home of a powerful raider gang, led by the profane but somewhat sympathetic Meg Groberg, who seeks to re-establish raider control over Appalachia after a brief, hiatus from the region. Anyway, the raiders here and faction questline are all incidental. The real interesting thing about this crashed space station is where it landed. More specifically, what lies beneath where it landed. Remember those Metroman statues we discussed earlier? Well, yeah, there's one here. Beneath the space station, in a series of underground tunnels carved by the raiders for storage and sleeping space, accessible through the station's core, on one of the walls, just sitting there ominously, is indeed another one of the Metroman busts, gazing menacingly through the dirt halls. Now, this statue sits directly beneath the center of the crashed station. When this thing was knocked out of orbit, it crashed right on top of this buried Metroman. What are the statistical odds of something like that happening? Gotta be close to 0, right? It gets even weirder though, because atop one section of the broken off craft, towards the eastern edge of the site, is this weird skeleton. A skeleton that we've talked about before on this channel. In fact, it came up in our most recent video, but I haven't mentioned it yet in this Iceberg, so I suppose now is a good time. In a few locations across Appalachia, there's this large animal skeleton that highly resembles that of beluga whales, just with a slightly different body and little bigger size, that can be found in places that beluga whales have no business being in. They have a tendency to pop up around moth cult sites, and are often incorporated into Mothman effigies. There's this one particular full skeleton over at Big Maw, surrounded by human skeletons and Mothman totems, that seems to have been calling people to their deaths, which is particularly sus, but yeah, it's weird. A look in the game files reveals that the model used for these bones is actually just a reused version of whale bones from Fallout 4's Far Harbor expansion, which we could find all over the coasts, and is quite a clue. Anyway, the crater features one of these skeletons sort of strung out over a piece of wreckage. Weird, right? Well, we might have a bit of context here, but it creates way more questions than it answers. You see, one of the raiders who lives here at the crater is a man named Munch. Munch considers himself something of a historian and claims to know all sorts of interesting pre-war facts and stories. The problem is that most everything he tells you about history and the world is an exaggeration, misunderstanding, or straight-up lie. He openly admits this, by the way. He claims that it spices things up to make history more interesting and fun for his fellow raiders. Anyway, with this background in mind, on Munch's desk within his room is a paper note titled "A Whale of a Tale," and its contents are as follows. Quote, "Munch's Memoirs, A Whale of a Tale. Most of the kids here don't know the truth about whales. They used to be the largest, most feared land predators in North America. You always knew they were coming because of the whale quakes. They'd wake from hibernation out of the ground and start burrowing their way to the surface. Once on land, they were a force of pure destruction. A single whale could take down a whole building if it was in their way. They had razor-sharp fins to slice people in half and gruesome baleen for teeth. If they sucked you in, those teeth would slice you up like a loaf of bread. The kids found some old bones while digging out the core. I told them they were lucky, not only because it was dead, but because this one was just a baby." End quote. Now, this is obviously just blatant misinformation. Munch seems to be confusing whales with the worms from the Tremor movies, but the thing about Munch's tall tales is that they often do contain some kernels and traces of truth. Like, seriously, what are all these whale skeletons doing buried so deep underground? Appalachia hasn't even been below sea level in 500 million years, well before whales even came close to evolving. So, maybe he could be onto something here. Maybe these things are the remains of something burrowing, and maybe the ones we find, the skeletons we see, are just the babies. Whatever its origin and nature, the fact that this skeleton is found here alongside the Metroman, buried directly beneath the space station, is eerily suspicious. Clearly, this place has some sort of occult significance. I know we've already spent a good amount of time on the space station, but there's more that I should say. You see, back in 2018, NoClip produced what's become a pretty famous documentary about the history and structure of Bethesda Game Studios in the lead up to Fallout 76's launch. And in that documentary, we got to see several shots of the company's Maryland offices. In some of these shots, pieces of old Fallout 76 art could be found dotting the walls. Well, one of those pieces of concept art that we got an ever so brief glimpse of was the crater from Fallout 76. And if you looked really closely and enhanced the image, you'd see the letters BOMB-001 engraved on the side. This is huge because the Bomb 001, or Ballistic Orbital Missile Base, was a space station that was supposed to have a huge role in Fallout Van Buren. Like Project V13, Fallout Van Buren was a cancelled Fallout game that was being developed by Interplay Entertainment and Black Isle Studios. Its development began shortly after the release of Fallout 2 in 1999, and it was meant to be Fallout 3, until the game was cancelled in 2003 following serious financial difficulties for the company. Design documents and concept art that have since been published by Interplay confirmed that Van Buren would have been set in a region of the western United States that incorporated parts of Colorado, Nevada, Arizona, and Utah. And at the climax of the game, the player would blast off to a massive space station stuck in orbit above the country, called the Ballistic Orbital Missile Base, or BOMB-001, which seems to be the same space station that we found in Fallout 76. Or at least, that was Bethesda's initial idea when developing the space, given the concept art we see. Of course, at some point the developers seem to have changed their mind. With the introduction of the Wastelanders expansion in 2018, the name of the space station became the Valiant 1, and when Bethesda later officially published Fallout 76's concept art book, they deliberately altered the image of the station to hide the BOMB-001 name with glare. So, while they originally intended for this to be the Van Buren craft, Bethesda seems to have scrapped that idea and changed it. Why they did so, why this crater is surrounded by so many eldritch artifacts, and what this all means, however, are questions that only Todd could answer. Moving on, nothing is real refers to a mysterious phrase that we can find graffitied once during the events of Fallout 4, and later all over Appalachia in Fallout 76. You see, the first time we came across this phrase was during the quest The Heretic, as a part of the Children of Adam storyline in Far Harbor, where High Confessor Tectus would send the player off to track down a rogue child of Adam named Sister Gwyneth, who recently abandoned the faction and set off on her own. We'd be ordered to track down Sister Gwyneth and bring her to Adam's justice. Upon finally discovering her, we could either send her soul to Adam's judgment, convince her to repent and return, or agree to help facilitate her escape by returning to the Adamites and lying. Whatever the case, it's a fun quest that gives us much to consider and a lot of influence over how it progresses. Anyway, while pursuing Gwyneth, but before reaching her, we would eventually happen upon this cabin that she must have stayed in for a few days. And all over the walls of the structure were graffitied phrases in red paint, saying things like, "Adam is a lie, the children must be saved," and the words, "Nothing is real." Anyway, doesn't seem like much, right? Just the mad ravings of a disillusioned religious fanatic. Well, in Fallout 76, which, mind you, is set 185 years prior to Fallout 4 and 1,000 miles southeast of Bar Harbor, Maine, we can find that same "nothing is real" phrase in several locations. It's found in the old Eleni Asylum turned Brotherhood of Steel stronghold, Fort Defiance, scribbled on the walls. We find it on some electrical transport pylons on the northeastern edges of the map, and there's another piece of "nothing is real" graffiti in the Watoga High School at the presidential debate stage. Hilariously, Fallout 76's upcoming Skyline Valley update, set to release officially this June but already available for beta play on the PC public test server, unlocks a new region of southern Appalachia, known as the Skyline Valley. And there, we can find another "nothing is real" quote engraved into a wall, with a small note underneath it, which reads, quote, "We are in a wasteland and you spend your time writing this on a wall? Get a life." Signed, Lewis. "I wish whoever wrote this was not real." Signed, Becky. "Why do people like this survive?" Robert. "I bet you think writing 'nothing is real' makes you so deep and interesting. It makes you look like an idiot to the rest of us." Lewis. So, clearly, we're not the only party interested in the author of this graffiti. However, its source remains a mystery, much to the frustration of local raiders. Getting close to the end here, we ask, what is the Black Star who dreams beneath? So, let me explain. This one requires a bit of context. In early 2023, the Fallout Winter of Adam role-playing guidebook released. For those of you who don't know, there's a Fallout tabletop role-playing RPG in the same mold as Dungeons & Dragons, published by Modifus Entertainment, and last March, they published a new rulebook for a new campaign called The Winter of Adam, which was set in the Commonwealth roughly 1 year prior to the events of Fallout 4, and centered around the recent emergence of a particularly aggressive and militant sect of the Children of Adam, led by the mysterious Adam Whately, who sought to conquer the Commonwealth in his image. Long story short, at the climax of the campaign, it's revealed that this Adam Whately guy who's leading the new faction of Adamites is actually a direct descendant of a powerful pre-war United States general named John Whately. And in the final act of the campaign, we track Adam down to an old United States military research facility secretly hidden beneath a forgotten church in the glowing sea. Yeah, that forgotten church. And this facility was evidently once overseen by that ancestor general of his. Anyway, we'd soon discover that the research being conducted at this station was very unusual. We'd find cryopods, strange Lovecraftian-looking pictures, and when we finally breached General John Whately's old personal office, well, I'll just quote directly from the book. The cracked walnut desk plaque is embellished with 4 stars, and reads, John Whately, protect and serve. Its single drawer requires a perception plus lockpick test with a difficulty of 4 to unlock. It contains Whately's pistol, the Magnum Nomicon, loaded with 4 plus 2 CD 44 Magnum rounds, and a King James Bible. Whately scrawled furious rants about Christianity's lies in the Bible's margins, claiming that the only true God is the Black Star who dreams beneath. What? What cursed Lovecraftian nonsense was this pre-war general worshipping? The Game Master will next direct the players to the general's computer, where the following prompt plays out. Quote, a prompt appears when a player character uses the computer. Will you wake the dreamer? Yes or no? If they do not type yes, a sobbing Vault Boy animation flickers on the screen, then disappears. When they type yes, a series of disturbing videos play. A serpent devours its own tail. Atomic explosions flatten 13 significant landmarks on different continents. Black-robed individuals ritually sacrifice an elderly man with wickedly curved daggers. Tree-sized tentacles writhe intertwined around a star-shaped obsidian statue. At a sunny family cookout, everyone smiles and laughs way too much. Afterwards, the floor in the middle of the office rises, revealing a secret elevator. A crying Vault Boy? Was Vault-Tec in on this? Did they have something to do here? The ritual sacrifice with curved daggers is highly evocative of the visions we witness at Dunwich Borers in Fallout 4, and some of the moth cult activities in Fallout 76 as well. Alas, after taking the elevator down, players are led to a massive cavern illuminated by strange blue crystals, where they can finally confront Adam Whately himself, in a glistening suit of custom power armor. And he'll be aided by these strange black tentacles that come from the abyss during an encounter. After defeating him, the game concludes, and the Commonwealth will have been saved. But good God, what was that all about? Evidently, at least some of the top brass in the old American military were actively worshipping and entertaining dark Lovecraftian forces, and maybe even Vault-Tec had some association with it? It's weird. The Winter of Adam book offers us our most lucid account of eldritch horror in the Fallout franchise yet, and is indeed considered to be canon. The identity of this Black Star who dreams beneath remains unknown, though. It may have been the tentacle creature thing that helps Adam Whately in the final boss fight, or something even more grand. Whatever the case, whatever General John Whately was pursuing, and the exact extent of old America's association with these eldritch forces, are some of the greatest conceivable mysteries in the franchise. Alright, this next detail is going to be our last, and I thought it would be neat to include a mystery from the Fallout TV show on the list. So that's how we're going to wrap things up. Bit of a spoiler warning, this last one will contain some mild to moderate show spoilers. No big plot lines or anything, but still some interesting stuff. So be warned, but yeah, let's get right into it. Our final mystery, Man in Black, refers to the identity of a mysterious, silhouetted character who we get a couple of brief glimpses of during the final episode of the Fallout TV series. Indeed, in episode 8, there's this pre-war flashback scene where we witness a meeting at Vault-Tec's California headquarters between Vault-Tec executives and several major business tycoons, including Robert House, Frederick Sinclair, and others. During this scene, the camera briefly cuts a couple of times to a silhouetted male overlooking the meeting from above. The Vault-Tec executives seem to be taking cues from him and even receiving Pip-Boy messages, but his identity is never revealed and his total screen time is only like 8 seconds, making him very easy to miss. The character looks to be a bald, or at least thinning, Caucasian male, perhaps between the ages of 45 and 70, from what we can glean, but beyond that, there are little cues as to who this strange overlord could be. A logical conclusion is that this man may be Vault-Tec's CEO. Indeed, despite the company's prolific position in the franchise, we never actually get an opportunity to learn its CEO's identity. Some terminals in past games do confirm the existence of a CEO, we just don't know who he or she is. Additionally, an even more likely candidate for the silhouette, in my opinion, is Dr. Stanislaus Braun. Before the war, Dr. Braun was the director of Vault-Tec's Societal Preservation Program, and the creator of the Garden of Eden Creation Kit. Fallout 3's terminals also refer to him as the company's Chief Scientific Officer, and he overall seems to have been a very influential and powerful figure in the company before the bombs fell. Very likely, one of the company's most powerful figures. Alas, as we learned during the events of Fallout 3, Dr. Braun also assigned himself to become the overseer of Vault 112, a vault whose inhabitants were placed into artificial stasis chambers and whose consciousnesses were uploaded into a simulation. Braun quickly grew mad with his power over the computer program, and has spent the last 200 years entertaining himself by subjecting the other dwellers to cruel, horrific scenarios in the simulation. Thankfully, we're able to put an end to this monster's sick games, but he does seem to be a fitting candidate for the silhouetted character in the series. He matches what we can identify about the physical appearance quite well, and would absolutely be in a position to secretly preside over company meetings. Another possibility was revealed during a short released by Amazon. You see, about a week after the series went live, and after I wrote this piece, Amazon released a 2.5-minute Vault-Tec training video hosted by executive Bud Askins as an extra. And in this brief managerial introduction, we get a glimpse of the company's board of directors, which Bud lovingly refers to as Daddy. And at the center of that board is an elderly, bald male with what may be a similar pair of glasses as to those being worn by the silhouette. It's likely that this man is the company's CEO or majority shareholder, and his presence overlooking, or dare I say, overseeing, such an important meeting makes total sense. Whatever the case, I expect that this question will be answered in the next season. Alrighty, and there you have it, folks, our third edition of the Fallout Mysteries Iceberg. Thanks for stopping by, everybody. I know that this video is about 7 or okay, fine, maybe 8 months overdue, and being part 3 in what was a 3-part series, this should be the end. But frankly, at the same time, there's still some more ground for us to cover if we want to. Like, as I'm developing the third parts of this iceberg, and you know, in the several months between our last 2 episodes, so many new mysteries have been added to my little list that there's room for more content in this department. So we'll see if this is the formal end. It's otherwise been a pretty big month for Fallout, though. New TV show, big new Fallout 4 update, big new upcoming Fallout 76 update, big new mods. It's just been wild. Probably the most exciting month for the franchise in almost the last decade. Since Fallout 4's release? It's crazy. I'm not sure if I'll make a full video on it, but for those wondering about my thoughts on the show, I'm a big fan. It's been my favorite show since Game of Thrones, but then again, I also talk about Fallout for a living, and I'm like, Fallout is one of the things that my life revolves around, and I haven't watched a lot of TV since Game of Thrones anyway, so I may be a bit biased. But anyway, yeah, lots of stuff to get to, new content soon. Hope to see y'all in the next one. Peace out, everybody.